In the annals of history, amidst the rise and fall of empires, the clash of civilizations, and the ebb and flow of human fortunes, one enduring philosophy has stood the test of time: Stoicism. Born in the crucible of ancient Greece and nurtured in the fertile soil of Roman intellect, Stoicism remains a beacon of wisdom and resilience in an ever-changing world. Stoicism emerged in the 3rd century BCE, founded by Zeno of Citium, a humble merchant-turned-philosopher who found solace in the teachings of Socrates. Drawing inspiration from the Stoic ideal of living in harmony with nature, Zeno and his disciples crafted a philosophy centered on the pursuit of virtue, reason, and inner tranquility. In the bustling agora of Athens and the marble halls of Rome, Stoicism found fertile ground, attracting luminaries such as Epictetus, a former slave who rose to prominence as a philosopher and teacher, and Seneca, the esteemed statesman and advisor to Emperor Nero, and Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king whose meditations offer timeless wisdom for the ages. But what, you may ask, is Stoicism, and why does it matter in our modern world? At its core, Stoicism is not merely a philosophy but a way of life, a practical guide for navigating the trials and tribulations of human existence with grace, dignity, and resilience. In today's fast-paced, interconnected world, we are bombarded with myriad challenges, from the pressures of work and relationships to the constant onslaught of social media and information overload. In the face of such adversity, Stoicism offers a timeless blueprint for finding inner peace, purpose, and meaning amidst the chaos. Over the course of this video, we will delve deep into the heart of Stoicism and explore how its timeless principles can help us navigate one of life's greatest challenges: disrespect. Whether it manifests as a subtle slight from a colleague, a harsh critique from a loved one, or a blatant attack on our character, disrespect has the power to wound, to infuriate, to undermine our sense of self-worth. But fear not, for the wisdom of the Stoics shines like a beacon in the darkness, guiding us through the stormy seas of indignity with steadfast resolve and unwavering dignity. Through the timeless insights of philosophers such as Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, we will learn how to confront disrespect with grace, courage, and inner fortitude. For in the crucible of adversity, we have the opportunity to forge our character, to rise above the petty slights and indignities of daily life, and to embrace the higher virtues of our nature. So let us embark on this journey together, as fellow seekers of truth, wisdom, and inner peace. Join me on a journey of self-discovery and transformation as we explore the ancient wisdom of Stoicism and discover how its principles can empower us to endure disrespect with grace and dignity, to cultivate inner strength and resilience, and to reclaim agency over our emotional lives. In the vast tapestry of human existence, woven with threads of joy and sorrow, triumph and defeat, we find ourselves confronted with an ever-present challenge: disrespect. It is a bitter pill, often laced with the venom of malice or ignorance, that we are forced to swallow in the course of our lives. Yet, in the crucible of adversity, we discover the true metal of our character. It is here, amidst the tumultuous storms of indignity, that Stoicism beckons us to find solace, strength, and wisdom. The ancient Stoics, those venerable sages of old, understood the relentless nature of the human condition. They recognized that life is fraught with hardship, and that the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune spare no one. But rather than succumb to despair or lash out in anger, they embraced a philosophy of resilience, grounded in reason, virtue, and inner tranquility. To confront disrespect with grace and dignity, we must first understand its nature. Disrespect, whether deliberate or unintended, arises from a fundamental misunderstanding of our inherent worth as rational beings. It is born of ignorance, fear, or insecurity, and manifests itself in myriad forms, from the cutting words of a detractor to the subtle disdain of a colleague. In the face of such affronts, the Stoic sage remains steadfast, unwavering in their commitment to virtue. They recognize that external events are beyond their control, but that their response to those events lies firmly within their grasp. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. One of the cardinal virtues espoused by the Stoics is that of temperance, the mastery of one's desires and emotions. In the presence of disrespect, the Stoic cultivates a serene detachment, refusing to be swayed by the opinions or actions of others. They understand that true dignity comes not from external validation, but from an unwavering commitment to moral integrity. Consider the example of Cato the Younger, the quintessential Stoic statesman of ancient Rome. In the face of relentless opposition and scorn from his political adversaries, Cato remained resolute, unyielding in his pursuit of justice and righteousness. Despite the slings and arrows hurled at him, he stood firm, a beacon of integrity in a sea of corruption. But Stoicism is not merely a philosophy of endurance, it is also a philosophy of transformation. In the crucible of disrespect, we have the opportunity to cultivate virtues such as courage, patience, and compassion. It is through adversity that we forge the steel of our character, honing it into a weapon capable of withstanding the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. The Stoic philosopher Seneca reminds us that difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. In the face of disrespect, we are presented with an opportunity to rise above our base instincts and embrace the higher virtues of our nature. It is through the crucible of adversity that we discover our true potential, tapping into reservoirs of strength and resilience we never knew we possessed. But perhaps the greatest lesson of Stoicism lies in its emphasis on the power of perspective. The Stoics understood that our perception of events shapes our reality, and that by reframing our thoughts, we can transform even the most bitter trials into opportunities for growth and self-discovery. In the words of the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. By cultivating a mindset of gratitude and resilience, we can transcend the petty slights and indignities of daily life, finding solace in the knowledge that our worth is not determined by the opinions of others. Ultimately, the Stoic approach to disrespect is one of profound inner transformation. It is a journey of self-discovery, in which we confront our own weaknesses and limitations, and emerge stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. It is a journey that requires courage, patience, and unwavering commitment, but it is a journey that leads to true freedom and inner peace. So, my fellow travelers on the road of life, let us embrace the Stoic virtues of temperance, courage, and resilience. Let us confront disrespect with grace and dignity, knowing that our worth lies not in the opinions of others, but in the steadfastness of our own character. And let us remember, always, the words of the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, "He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things which he has not, but rejoices for those which he has." In the crucible of disrespect, let us be like the Stoic sage, steadfast, unwavering, and serene in the face of adversity. For it is through the fire of tribulation that we are forged into beings of strength and resilience, capable of weathering any storm that life may bring. And in the end, it is not the challenges we face that define us, but the grace and dignity with which we confront them. Certainly, let us delve into the various Stoic approaches one can take to counter disrespect, drawing upon the rich tapestry of ancient wisdom woven by Stoic philosophers. 1. Understanding the nature of disrespect. The Stoic approach begins with a deep understanding of the nature of disrespect. Recognize that disrespect often stems from ignorance, fear, or insecurity in others. By understanding the root causes of disrespect, we can cultivate empathy and compassion, realizing that the actions of others are often a reflection of their own inner turmoil rather than a reflection of our worth. 2. Embracing virtue. At the heart of Stoicism lies the pursuit of virtue, namely, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. When faced with disrespect, we must strive to embody these virtues in our response. Maintain wisdom by recognizing that external events are beyond our control, and focus instead on cultivating inner tranquility. Summon courage to respond with grace and dignity, even in the face of adversity. Exercise temperance by mastering our emotions and impulses, refusing to be swayed by the opinions of others. And uphold justice by treating others with fairness and respect, regardless of their behavior towards us. 3. Practicing Stoic indifference. The Stoics advocate for a state of inner tranquility known as apatheia, or indifference. This does not mean apathy or detachment from the world, but rather a serene acceptance of external events beyond our control. When confronted with disrespect, practice Stoic indifference by acknowledging the event without allowing it to disturb your inner peace. Recognize that the opinions of others hold no power over your true worth, which lies in your commitment to virtue. 4. Cultivating inner strength. Stoicism teaches us to view adversity as an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. When faced with disrespect, use it as an opportunity to cultivate inner strength and resilience. Practice resilience by reframing negative events as opportunities for learning and personal development. Draw upon the Stoic concept of amor fati, or love of fate, by embracing every challenge as an essential part of your journey towards self-mastery. 5. Practicing mindfulness and self-reflection. Mindfulness and self-reflection are essential tools in the Stoic toolkit for countering disrespect. Take time each day to cultivate mindfulness through practices such as meditation or journaling. Use self-reflection to examine your reactions to disrespectful behavior and identify areas for growth and improvement. By developing greater self-awareness, you can respond to disrespect with greater wisdom and grace. 6. Maintaining perspective. In the grand scheme of things, the opinions of others hold little significance. Maintain perspective by focusing on the things that truly matter in life, namely, the cultivation of virtue and the pursuit of eudaimonia, or flourishing. When confronted with disrespect, remind yourself of the Stoic principle that our worth is determined not by external events, but by the steadfastness of our character. 7. Choosing your battles wisely. Not every act of disrespect requires a response. The Stoics counsel us to choose our battles wisely, recognizing that our time and energy are finite resources. When faced with disrespect, consider whether it is worth your time and energy to engage with the situation. Sometimes, the most Stoic response is to simply let go and move on, refusing to allow the actions of others to disturb your inner peace. In conclusion, the Stoic approach to countering disrespect is grounded in the cultivation of virtue, inner strength, and resilience. By embracing Stoic principles such as wisdom, courage, and indifference, we can confront disrespect with grace and dignity, realizing that our worth lies not in the opinions of others, but in the steadfastness of our own character. In the vast expanse of human experience, disrespect emerges as a formidable adversary, challenging our sense of worth, dignity, and self-respect. Yet, within the annals of ancient philosophy, particularly within the Stoic tradition, we find a treasure trove of wisdom, offering profound insights and practical strategies for confronting disrespect with grace, resilience, and inner fortitude. At the heart of Stoic philosophy lies a deep understanding of the human condition, a recognition that life is inherently fraught with challenges, injustices, and uncertainties. From the humble teachings of Zeno of Citium to the profound meditations of Marcus Aurelius, Stoic thinkers have grappled with the perennial questions of existence, seeking to equip humanity with the tools necessary to navigate the tumultuous seas of fortune. Central to the Stoic response to disrespect is the cultivation of virtue, a moral compass guiding our thoughts, actions, and emotions. Drawing inspiration from the cardinal virtues of wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, Stoicism implores us to embody these principles in our daily lives, especially in moments of adversity. By cultivating a steadfast commitment to moral integrity, we transcend the petty slights and indignities of the external world, anchoring ourselves in an unshakable sense of self-worth. Moreover, Stoicism offers a radical reorientation of our perspective on adversity, inviting us to embrace the dichotomy of control. Rooted in the teachings of Epictetus, this principle reminds us that while we cannot always control the actions or opinions of others, we retain absolute sovereignty over our own attitudes and responses. By relinquishing our attachment to external validation and focusing instead on cultivating inner resilience, we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of circumstance, reclaiming agency over our lives. The Stoic response to disrespect is not one of passive resignation or apathy, but rather active engagement and transformation. It is a call to arms, summoning us to confront adversity with courage, dignity, and wisdom. Consider the legendary figure of Cato the Younger, whose unwavering commitment to virtue in the face of relentless opposition serves as a timeless testament to the indomitable spirit of Stoicism. In emulating his example, we discover within ourselves reservoirs of strength and resilience previously untapped, transcending the limitations of our perceived limitations. Furthermore, Stoicism teaches us the transformative power of perspective, urging us to reframe our thoughts and perceptions in the crucible of adversity. Through the practice of negative visualization, we confront our deepest fears and insecurities, preparing ourselves for the inevitable trials that lie ahead. By cultivating an attitude of gratitude and acceptance, we transmute the bitter sting of disrespect into an opportunity for growth, self-discovery, and spiritual evolution. In conclusion, Stoicism offers a timeless philosophy for mastering disrespect and navigating the vicissitudes of human existence. It teaches us to cultivate inner fortitude through the practice of virtue, to reclaim agency over our attitudes and responses, and to embrace adversity as a catalyst for personal growth and transformation. By embodying these principles in our daily lives, we transcend the limitations of external validation, finding true freedom and inner peace amidst the tumult of the world. As we embark on the journey ahead, let us heed the words of the Stoic sages, drawing inspiration from their timeless wisdom, and forging our path with courage, dignity, and unwavering resolve.